What if history had taken just one small detour? Picture this: the Library of Alexandria, a treasure trove of ancient knowledge, standing untouched by flames, its shelves still brimming with scrolls that could have reshaped the course of human civilization. The ideas lost in that fire might have accelerated science by centuries, or perhaps even altered the very fabric of our modern world. It's a haunting thought, isn't it? That a single moment, a single decision could ripple through time, rewriting everything we know. This is the power of the what if, the tantalizing possibility that history isn't as fixed as it seems. What if the Roman Empire had never fallen? What if the Mongols had conquered Europe? What if a single battle, a single invention, or even a single conversation had gone differently? These alternate realities aren't just flights of fancy. They're windows into how fragile and interconnected our past truly is. Every decision, every accident, every twist of fate has the potential to send the world spinning down an entirely new path. And that's exactly what we're about to explore. Over the next 25 scenarios, we'll journey through the most pivotal what-ifs in history, moments where the slightest change could have reshaped empires, redirected wars, or even redefined humanity itself. From the fall of great civilizations to the rise of forgotten possibilities, each of these alternate histories holds a lesson about the delicate balance of our world. So buckle in, because by the end of this, you'll never look at history the same way again. The past isn't just a story already written. It's a tapestry of endless possibilities waiting to be unraveled. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building. It was the beating heart of human knowledge. Imagine if its vast collection of scrolls had survived, sheltering the work of thinkers like Euclid, Archimedes, and Hippocrates for future generations. Without the devastating fires that consumed it, we might have unlocked the secrets of gravity centuries before Newton, or mapped the stars with precision long before the telescope. Think about it. What if the works of ancient astronomers detailing celestial patterns lost to time had fueled the scientific revolution earlier? Or if medical texts containing forgotten cures had survived to reshape medieval medicine? The ripple effect would have been staggering. Consider the Renaissance, that explosion of art and science. What if, instead of rediscovering fragments of Greek and Roman thought, scholars had access to the full breadth of Alexandria's treasures? Da Vinci might have built upon Archimedes' engineering sketches rather than reinventing them. Galileo could have refined existing theories of planetary motion instead of starting from scratch. Even something as fundamental as algebra might have evolved differently. Imagine a world where complex equations were common knowledge by the Middle Ages, accelerating everything from architecture to navigation. And then there's medicine. The library housed texts on surgery, anatomy, and herbal remedies that vanished into smoke. Had they endured, the Dark Ages might not have been so dark. Epidemics could have been met with advanced understanding instead of superstition. Surgeries might have been routine, sparing countless lives. The very trajectory of human health could have shifted, bending toward longer, wiser lives centuries sooner. But here's the haunting twist: we'll never truly know what was lost. The library's fate reminds us how fragile knowledge can be, how easily the threads of progress can unravel. Yet it also makes you wonder, what forgotten ideas buried in those ashes could have changed everything? One thing's certain: the world we live in would look profoundly different if even a fraction of that wisdom had survived. Archimedes' lost works alone could have rewritten the foundations of physics. Among the ashes of Alexandria was his treatise on floating bodies, which laid the groundwork for fluid dynamics. But what if his even more advanced manuscripts, rumored to contain early calculus concepts, had survived? Newton famously built upon the shoulders of giants, but with Archimedes' full corpus intact, those shoulders might have lifted him, and all of science higher centuries sooner. Imagine Newton poring over scrolls detailing not just buoyancy, but proto-equations for planetary motion, or sketches of mechanical systems resembling primitive steam engines. The scientific revolution might have erupted in the 1300s instead of the 1600s, compressing humanity's technological timeline dramatically. Then there's Hipparchus, the ancient astronomer whose star catalogue mapped over 850 celestial bodies with shocking accuracy. His work vanished in Alexandria's flames, leaving later astronomers like Ptolemy to reconstruct the cosmos with far cruder tools. Had Hipparchus' data survived, Galileo's telescope wouldn't have been a revelation. It would have been a confirmation. Telescopic observations in the 1600s might have matched seamlessly with Hipparchus' charts, turning star navigation into a precise science by the Middle Ages. Picture ships crossing oceans with error-free celestial maps, or Kepler deciphering planetary orbits without wasting years on flawed Ptolemaic models. The night sky itself could have become an open book generations earlier, and what of the lesser-known texts, scrolls on metallurgy might have revealed Roman techniques for producing steel strong enough to skip the entire Dark Ages technological slump. Medical treatises could have contained herbal remedies later, discovered by Renaissance physicians, or even early germ theory observations lost to time. One tantalizing fragment recovered from the library's ruins mentions a sphere of glass that magnifies, a possible reference to lenses. Had this knowledge spread, the microscope might have emerged alongside the printing press, turbocharging biology before the Black Death even struck. The cruelest irony, we know just enough about Alexandria's lost works to mourn them. A single surviving catalogue lists titles like On the Construction of War Engines and The Measurement of the Earth's Curvature, a hint of ideas that could have leapfrogged entire eras of trial and error. It's not just about individual geniuses like Newton or Galileo getting a head start. It's about the collective acceleration of human thought, the domino effect of preserved knowledge stacking century upon century. Every scroll that burned wasn't just a loss for antiquity, it was a theft from the future. In 1241, the Mongol Empire stood on the brink of an unimaginable conquest. Their armies had already crushed the mightiest kingdoms of Asia and Eastern Europe, leaving a trail of shattered cities in their wake. Then, just as their cavalry prepared to charge deeper into Europe, word arrived Urjade Khan, the great Khan himself, was dead. In an instant, the invasion halted. Generals withdrew to settle the succession, and Europe was spared. But what if that message had arrived a week later? Or never at all, the Mongols were unstoppable at their peak. Their tactics, discipline, and sheer mobility could have carried them all the way to the Atlantic. Think of the immediate consequences: Paris, Vienna, Rome. None of Europe's great cities were prepared for the storm that had obliterated Kiev and Budapest. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they reshaped entire societies. Their rule brought religious tolerance, meritocratic administration, and a sprawling postal system that connected continents. Under their grip, Europe might have avoided the fractious wars of the Middle Ages, replaced instead by a single, efficient superstate. Latin could have vanished as a scholarly language, replaced by Mongolian or Persian in official documents. The Catholic Church's power might have crumbled under the Khan's policy of pluralism, where Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity coexisted under imperial decree. Then there's trade. The Mongols didn't just build an empire, they built a network. The Silk Road thrived under their protection, linking China to the Mediterranean. If their reach had extended to Europe's western ports, goods, ideas, and technologies would have flowed uninterrupted from one end of Eurasia to the other. Gunpowder might have reached England by 1300, accelerating warfare beyond recognition. The Black Death could have spread even faster, or perhaps been contained by Mongol quarantines. And what of the Renaissance? Would Florence's artists have flourished under Khans who valued practicality over humanist ideals? Or would Europe's intellectual rebirth have been smothered in its cradle? Most haunting of all, this wasn't some distant possibility. It nearly happened. The Mongol withdrawal wasn't caused by defeat, but by a twist of fate. That's the fragile reality of history. An empire that reshaped half the world was one heartbeat away from reshaping all of it. Rome never fell. Those 3 words rewrite 1,000 years of history. Picture a world where the Western Empire endured, its legions holding the frontiers against barbarian invasions, its bureaucrats keeping the roads and aqueducts functioning, its scholars preserving the knowledge that in our timeline was scattered to the wind. Instead of the fractured kingdoms of medieval Europe, imagine a single, unbroken civilization stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia, evolving rather than collapsing. The Dark Ages, that grim period of stagnation, might never have happened. Cities wouldn't have crumbled into ruin, libraries wouldn't have burned. The technological momentum of Rome, its concrete, its mechanical innovations, its ambitious engineering could have continued uninterrupted. Take something as simple as the Antikythera mechanism, that astonishing ancient Greek device often called the world's first computer. In a surviving Rome, such inventions wouldn't be curiosities lost to time. They'd be the foundation for ever more sophisticated machinery. Historians have found evidence that Roman engineers toyed with steam power, using it for temple tricks and minor gadgets. With a stable empire fueling research, could those early experiments have blossomed into full-scale industrialization a millennium early? Picture steam-driven ships crossing the Mediterranean by 700, or automated mills freeing laborers from backbreaking work while Europe in our timeline still relied on oxen and hand tools. The very rhythm of progress would have accelerated beyond recognition. Language would tell another story. Latin, already the lingua franca of the West, might never have fractured into the patchwork of Romance languages. Instead of French, Spanish, and Italian evolving separately, a unified imperial administration could have kept Latin standardized, meaning a scholar in Londinium and a merchant in Carthage might have spoken the same refined tongue for centuries. The implications ripple outward. No language barriers to slow the spread of ideas, no need for Renaissance scholars to painfully reconstruct classical texts because they'd never been lost. Even Christianity's path might have diverged. Without the empire's collapse, the great schism that split the church into eastern and western halves could have been avoided. A single, unified Christianity under the Roman emperor's gaze might have resisted the Protestant Reformation entirely, altering the course of religious wars and the very map of faith. But perhaps the most striking change would be seen in the shape of Europe itself. No feudal fragmentation means no 100 squabbling kingdoms, no endless wars over scraps of territory. The Roman model of centralized governance, with its courts, its census systems, its professional armies, would have created stability where our timeline saw chaos. Cities like Paris and Berlin might have grown as planned imperial hubs rather than warlord strongholds, and with Rome's navy dominant, exploration could have taken a different turn. Imagine Roman caravels crossing the Atlantic not in 1492, but in 900, establishing contact with the Americas at the height of the Maya's classical era. The exchange of goods, crops, and ideas would have reshaped both hemispheres centuries before Columbus ever set sail. Yet for all these grand possibilities, there's a darker side to ponder. Rome wasn't just roads and aqueducts, it was conquest, slavery, and rigid social hierarchies. An empire that never fell might have ossified, resisting reforms that in our timeline emerged from the clash of new kingdoms. Could technological progress have coexisted with political stagnation? Would the absence of the Dark Ages also mean the absence of the creative ferment that eventually birthed the Renaissance? The beauty of these what-ifs lies in their complexity. Rome's survival isn't just a question of continuity, but of what might have been gained and lost in a world where the light of antiquity never flickered out. December 17, 1903, the day humanity first took to the skies in powered flight. But what if the Wright brothers' fragile biplane had crumpled on that windswept North Carolina dune? Without their breakthrough, the age of aviation might have stalled for decades, leaving the world tethered to the ground. Consider how differently the 20th century would have unfolded without wings. World War I, for starters, would have remained an earthbound slaughter. No fighter aces dueling in the clouds, no reconnaissance planes spotting enemy trenches from above. Battles like the Somme might have dragged on even longer, with generals blind to movements beyond the next hill. Artillery would have fired blindly, and cavalry charges already obsolete in our timeline could have lingered as a tragic relic of outdated tactics. Globalization would have crawled at a snail's pace. Ocean liners, not jets, would have remained the only way to cross continents, keeping international travel a luxury for the wealthy. Diplomats couldn't hop between capitals to defuse crises. Immigrants might have spent lifetimes saving for a one-way ticket. The economic ripple effects. Enormous. Without airmail, global trade would have relied on sluggish steamships, delaying everything from fashion trends to factory parts. Fresh produce wouldn't have flown from orchards to supermarkets. Out-of-season fruit would have stayed a fantasy for most. Even cultural exchange would have suffered. No Beatles flying to America to ignite the British invasion. No Olympic athletes converging in a different city every 4 years. The world would have felt vast, disconnected, and far less interdependent. Then there's technology itself. No aviation industry means no pressurized cabins, which in our timeline led to breakthroughs in materials science. Aluminum might have remained a novelty metal rather than the backbone of modern manufacturing. Radar, developed to track aircraft, could have been delayed indefinitely, leaving ships vulnerable to collisions and storms. And space, forget Sputnik or Apollo. Rocketry began as an offshoot of aeronautics. Without the Wrights, the dream of reaching orbit might have stayed in the pages of science fiction. Yet the most haunting absence would be the bird's eye view, literally. For millennia, humans could only imagine how their cities looked from above. Without aerial photography, maps would have stayed crude sketches. Urban planning wouldn't have had the perspective to design highways or zoning systems. Even environmentalism might have emerged later. It was photos of Earth from space that galvanized the modern conservation movement. The Wright brothers didn't just invent a machine, they reshaped humanity's relationship with distance, time, and possibility. Their failure wouldn't just have grounded planes. It would have grounded our very imagination. June 18, 1815, the date that shattered Napoleon's dreams of empire. But what if his cannons had roared louder that muddy morning at Waterloo? What if the Prussian reinforcements arrived too late, or Wellington's lines buckled under one final cavalry charge? Victory at Waterloo wouldn't just have saved Napoleon's throne. It might have redrawn the entire 19th century in France's image. Picture Europe without the Congress of Vienna's careful balance of power. A triumphant Napoleon could have forced his revolutionary reforms across the continent, entrenching the Napoleonic Code as the legal foundation of modern states. This wasn't just about inheritance laws or streamlined courts. It was a blueprint for secular governance, meritocracy, and individual rights that still shapes nations today. With France's influence unchecked, these ideas might have spread faster and farther, eroding aristocratic privilege from Lisbon to Moscow decades earlier. Then there's Germany. In our timeline, Prussia's victory at Waterloo paved the way for German unification under Bismarck's iron fist. But with Napoleon dominant, the German states might have coalesced under French patronage instead. Imagine a Rhineland confederation expanding eastward, blending French administrative efficiency with German industry, a superstate emerging not through blood and iron, but through treaties and trade. The Franco-German rivalry that fueled 2 world wars could have been bypassed entirely, replaced by an economic and cultural alliance stretching from Paris to Berlin. Britain's fate would have twisted just as dramatically. A French Europe might have strangled British imperialism in its cradle. No Pax Britannica means no globe-spanning empire built on naval supremacy. India could have remained a patchwork of princely states. Africa might never have suffered the scramble. Even the United States would have faced a very different 19th century. Without British industrial dominance, America's westward expansion could have collided with a French-backed Mexico or a Louisiana territory that never changed hands. But the most startling ripple might have been the erasure of World War I as we know it. Many historians trace the war's roots to German unification and the fragile power balance forged after Napoleon's defeat. Remove that defeat, and the web of alliances that dragged Europe into war in 1914 might never have formed. No Kaiser Wilhelm Roman II bristling for his place in the sun. No Revanchist France thirsting for revenge over Alsace-Lorraine. Instead, a French-led continental system could have smoothed tensions through shared legal frameworks and economic ties, or perhaps birthed entirely new conflicts between colonial spheres. Yet there's a darker edge to this alternate reality. Napoleon's empire, for all its reforms, was built on conscription and conquest. A lasting French hegemony might have stifled the very nationalist movements that eventually toppled monarchies and spread democracy. Would the revolutions of 1848 have even occurred? Would the ideals of liberty and self-determination have taken root as fiercely without Napoleon's defeat to fuel them? Waterloo wasn't just a battle, it was a hinge moment. The difference between the world we know and one where Paris, not London or Berlin, set the rhythm of modernity came down to the fog of one bloody afternoon. And that's the unsettling truth of history. Sometimes the future doesn't turn on grand movements or ideologies, but on which armies' boots sink deepest in the mud. The year 1347 marked Europe's descent into hell. The Black Death didn't just kill, it erased. Entire villages vanished, cities became graveyards, and the continent's population halved in a few horrific years. But what if it had been worse? What if, instead of 1 in 2, 9 in 10 had perished? The staggering scale of such devastation would have left Europe not weakened but hollow, a skeleton of its former self, its fields untended, its cathedrals silent, its kingdoms collapsing into dust. In this nightmare scenario, the center of gravity shifts east. The Islamic world, already in its golden age, would have faced no rival. While Europe bled, cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba were hubs of scholarship, medicine, and trade. With Europe's remnants too shattered to launch crusades or resist expansion, Islamic empires might have stretched their influence unchecked. Think of the libraries of Timbuktu becoming the new Alexandria, their shelves filled not just with Quranic texts but with advancements in astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. The works of Ibn Sina, whose medical encyclopedias were studied for centuries, could have become the foundation of global medicine. And without a strong European counterweight, the Ottoman Empire might have pushed deeper into the Balkans, perhaps even reaching Vienna unopposed, reshaping the religious and cultural map of the continent forever. Across the Atlantic, the consequences would have been just as profound. Native American civilizations like the Aztec and Inca thrived in isolation, their cities rivaling Europe's in size and sophistication. With Europe's population decimated, the age of colonization might have been delayed by centuries or skipped entirely. No Spanish conquistadors means Tenochtitlan isn't razed. No smallpox means the Americas aren't emptied by disease. Picture a world where the Mississippian mound builders continued their urban planning, where the Iroquois Confederacy expanded its democratic model, where the Inca's road system connected a pan-American empire. The Columbian Exchange, that seismic transfer of crops, animals, and cultures might never have happened, leaving potatoes in Peru, horses in Eurasia, and corn unknown beyond Mesoamerica. Industrialization, too, would have taken a different path. Europe's recovery from the plague fueled labor shortages that spurred technological innovation, but with almost no one left to rebuild, progress might have stalled indefinitely. The Renaissance, unlikely without Italian city-states to fund it. The scientific revolution delayed without universities to challenge old dogmas. Even the printing press, that great democratizer of knowledge, could have remained a curiosity without a literate middle class to buy books. Yet the darkest irony lies in medicine itself. The iconic plague doctors, those beaked figures haunting the streets, were powerless against the real killer. But with Europe gone, their failures might have spurred Islamic or Chinese physicians to pioneer germ theory centuries early. The very catastrophe that destroyed one civilization could have accelerated another's rise. History isn't just shaped by what happens, it's shaped by who's left to write it. A Europe reduced to ruins wouldn't just mean a different past, it would mean an entirely unrecognizable present. Nikola Tesla's vision of wireless electricity wasn't just ahead of its time, it was downright revolutionary. Imagine a planet crisscrossed not by power lines, but by invisible energy waves, beaming free electricity to every home, village, and city by the dawn of the 20th century. No coal-choked skies, no oil barons monopolizing energy, and no sprawling grids vulnerable to storms or sabotage. With his Wardenclyffe Tower prototypes working as intended, Tesla could have fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with power itself. The immediate effects would have been staggering. Factories no longer tethered to rivers or coal depots could have sprung up anywhere, decentralizing industry overnight. Rural electrification, which in our timeline took decades, might have happened in years, erasing the urban-rural divide before it even became entrenched. And without the need for vast fuel shipments, global trade routes would have shifted dramatically. The British Empire's coal-powered navy obsolete, the rise of Middle Eastern oil states. Never happened. Even something as mundane as home appliances would have transformed sooner. Imagine electric refrigerators and radios spreading to remote farms by 1910, not 1950. But the ripple effects go deeper. Free, clean energy would have reshaped environmentalism before the term even existed. Without smokestacks darkening the skies, the conservation movement might have focused on preserving forests rather than fighting pollution. National parks could have been established not just for beauty, but as scientific preserves, patches of pristine nature in a world otherwise humming with wireless power. The very concept of climate change might never have entered public consciousness because coal and oil would have remained niche curiosities, not the lifeblood of industrialization. Yet for all its promise, Tesla's utopia had potential shadows. Wireless energy transmission could have birthed terrifying new forms of warfare. Picture electromagnetic pulses weaponized to black out entire regions, or dictatorships manipulating power flows to control rebellious populations. Surveillance would have taken on a chilling dimension. If every device drew energy from the same global network, could governments track individual usage, even eavesdrop through powered appliances? And what happens when the system fails? Unlike isolated power plants, a single point of failure in a worldwide energy web could plunge continents into darkness simultaneously. Then there's the question of innovation itself. Would the convenience of free energy have stifled ingenuity? The internal combustion engine, developed in part because of fuel scarcity, gave us cars, planes, and countless spin-off technologies. If electricity had been too easy, would we have missed the pressure to invent? Even the architecture of cities might have suffered without the need to conserve energy. Buildings could have become grotesquely inefficient, squandering power simply because it was limitless. Tesla's dream wasn't just about flipping a switch and lighting a bulb. It was a fork in the road, one path leading to a world unshackled from resource wars and pollution, the other to a fragile, interconnected system ripe for abuse. The cruelest twist, we came agonizingly close. Wardenclyffe was underfunded, not unworkable. That's the haunting nature of history's what-ifs, the future that almost was, dangling just out of reach. 1908, Vienna, the moment fate could have taken an entirely different turn. A young Adolf Hitler, his dreams of becoming an artist hanging by a thread, stands before the gatekeepers of the Academy of Fine Arts. In our world, their rejection sent him spiraling into bitterness and extremism. But what if they'd seen potential in his brushstrokes? A simple nod of approval might have reshaped the entire 20th century. Picture this alternate timeline. Hitler, accepted into the academy, becomes just another struggling painter in Vienna's bohemian circles. No rise to power, no Nazi party, no Third Reich. The implications ripple outward in ways both profound and unsettling. First and foremost, no Holocaust. 6 million Jewish lives never stolen, along with millions of Roma, disabled individuals, and political desisters spared from genocide. The cultural and intellectual contributions of those lost communities would have flourished, transforming everything from science to literature. Einstein might never have fled to America, meaning the Manhattan Project could have stalled or taken a different shape. The State of Israel, without the horrors of the Holocaust as a catalyst, the Zionist movement might have evolved gradually rather than emerging as a desperate refuge. But the absence of Hitler's war machine also rewrites Europe's geopolitical landscape. World War II, as we know it, never happens. Without the Nazi invasion, the Soviet Union doesn't lose 27 million lives, nor does it emerge as a battered but triumphant superpower. Stalin's USSR, deprived of its great patriotic war mythos, might have remained an isolated pariah state rather than expanding its influence across Eastern Europe. The Iron Curtain could have been a far thinner line, or perhaps never drawn at all. Meanwhile, Britain and France, spared the devastation of war, hold onto their colonial empires longer. Without the economic exhaustion of fighting Hitler, decolonization slows to a crawl. India might not gain independence in 1947. Algeria could remain French well into the 60s. The Cold War itself might have been a quieter affair, with America less inclined to intervene globally without the precedent of stopping fascism. Yet the darkest question lingers: had Hitler never risen, would someone else have filled the void? The conditions that birthed fascism, economic turmoil, wounded nationalism, the fear of communism, didn't vanish with his rejection letter. Perhaps a different demagogue, less erratic but equally ruthless, would have exploited those tensions. Or maybe, without Hitler's personal vendettas and bizarre obsessions, a more pragmatic far-right movement would have taken hold, one that avoided the worst excesses of the Nazi regime but still reshaped Europe in troubling ways. The irony is crushing. The Academy's rejection wasn't just a minor setback, it was the thread that, when pulled, unraveled the world. And that's the haunting lesson of this what if. History doesn't always turn on grand movements or sweeping forces. Sometimes it pivots on something as fragile as an art school's verdict. The early 1500s could have witnessed an entirely different kind of discovery, one not led by European explorers, but by the towering treasure ships of China's Admiral Zheng He. His fleet, the largest the world had ever seen, dwarfed Columbus's modest vessels. While Europeans were still hugging coastlines, Zheng He's armada was capable of crossing oceans with ease. What if those ships hadn't been recalled and dismantled by a cautious emperor, but instead pushed eastward, landing on the shores of California decades before Spain even dreamed of a new world? A Chinese colonization of the Americas wouldn't have looked anything like Europe's violent conquests. Unlike the Spanish, who sought gold and conversion at sword point, the Ming dynasty's approach to foreign lands was one of trade and tribute. Indigenous civilizations like the Aztec and Inca might have been integrated into a vast Pacific trade network rather than decimated. Picture Tenochtitlan not as a razed ruin, but as a bustling hub exchanging silver for silk, its temples standing alongside Confucian academies. Without the catastrophic plagues brought by European contact, since Asia and the Americas had already shared diseases via earlier trade routes, native populations could have thrived, negotiating their place in this new world order rather than being erased by it. Language itself would have taken a radically different path. Instead of Spanish and English dominating the globe, Mandarin could have become the lingua franca of commerce and diplomacy. The very structure of communication might have been shaped by Chinese characters. Not the Roman alphabet. Imagine a world where calligraphy, not cursive, was the universal skill. Even political systems would have diverged. European-style nation-states, with their rigid borders and individualism, might have been outpaced by a Confucian model emphasizing harmony, meritocracy, and reciprocal obligations. The American Revolution, if it happened at all, could have drawn inspiration from imperial examinations rather than Enlightenment philosophers, producing leaders schooled in the Analects instead of Locke. Trade routes tell another story. With Chinese junks crisscrossing the Pacific, the economic center of gravity would have shifted irrevocably east. Silks, porcelain, and tea would have flowed into American ports, while maize and potatoes reached Asia centuries sooner, potentially averting famines that plagued China in later dynasties. Europe, sidelined from this trans-Pacific exchange, might have remained a peripheral player, its age of exploration rendered moot. No Columbus means no Spanish Empire, no flood of New World silver to inflate European economies, and perhaps no industrial revolution, at least not on the same timeline. The technologies that defined modernity could have emerged from Beijing's workshops instead of Manchester's factories, yet the most fascinating ripple might have been cultural. Chinese cosmology, with its emphasis on cyclical time, could have replaced the linear, progressive view of history that shaped European thought. Art, medicine, and even cuisine would have blended in ways we can scarcely imagine. Think acupuncture clinics in Cusco or Mayan astronomers collaborating with their counterparts in Nanjing. The fusion of philosophies could have birthed entirely new ways of understanding humanity's place in the universe. But here's the twist: Zheng He's voyages weren't failures. They were deliberately abandoned. The Ming dynasty turned inward, spurning the seas to focus on internal stability. That decision, more than any battle or treaty, shaped the next 6 centuries. It's a reminder that history isn't just shaped by what we do, it's shaped by what we choose not to do, and sometimes the paths not taken are the ones that haunt us most. A Confederate victory in 1865 wouldn't just have rewritten American history, it would have shattered it. Imagine a map where the Mason-Dixon line became an international border, splitting the continent into 2 hostile nations. The United States, stripped of its agricultural powerhouse in the South, stumbles into the 20th century as a second-rate power, while the Confederate States cling to an economy built on human bondage. Slavery, instead of ending with Lincoln's pen, festers for decades longer, morphing into an even crueler system as global pressure mounts. The Confederacy, desperate to justify its existence, might have pushed southward, eyeing Cuba, Nicaragua, or even the Amazon, not just for land, but to expand its peculiar institution beyond North America. The ripple effects would have reached far beyond plantations. Without a unified America, the Industrial Revolution stalls. Northern factories, deprived of southern cotton and markets, lag behind European competitors. Railroads fragmentary, with rival networks refusing to connect across the border. The Transcontinental Railroad, which bound the coasts in our timeline, might have ended at the Mississippi, leaving the West to be carved up by European powers or fractured into independent territories. Picture California as a French protectorate, or Texas, once its own republic, reasserting independence rather than choosing between 2 weakened nations. Now fast forward to the World Wars. A divided America can't project power the way it did in our timeline. In World War I, without the full might of U.S. industry and manpower, the Allies might have faltered. The Confederacy, sympathetic to European aristocracies and dependent on British textile mills, could have sided with the Central Powers, turning the conflict into a true continental civil war. Chemical weapons developed by both sides might have been used on American soil as Union and Confederate trenches mirrored the horrors of the Western Front. World War II becomes even darker. A fractured U.S. lacks the capacity to supply the Allies through Lend-Lease, let alone storm the beaches of Normandy. The Confederacy, with its racial ideology, might have found common cause with the Nazis or at least remained neutral, profiting from trade with both sides. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, unlikely. The Manhattan Project required resources and coordination only a unified superpower could muster. Instead, the war drags on, with Nazi scientists reaching the atomic bomb first. And what of civil rights? In our world, the movement gained momentum after African Americans proved their valor in 2 world wars. But in a Confederate victory scenario, Jim Crow isn't just Southern policy, it's a national export. The global fight against fascism in the 1940s can't be framed as a battle for freedom when one of the world's largest economies still openly trades in human beings. The moral authority that propelled America to leadership in the Cold War evaporates. Instead of the Marshall Plan rebuilding Europe, we might have seen a fractured, impoverished world where democracy never got its second wind. The bleakest twist, this wasn't some far-fetched fantasy. The Confederacy came dangerously close to victory multiple times. A single battle, a stray bullet, or a different outcome at Gettysburg could have tilted the balance. That's the fragility of history. The difference between the world we know and one drenched in shadows often hangs by a thread. The late Bronze Age Mediterranean was a dazzling web of interconnected kingdoms: Mycenaean Greece, the Hittite Empire, wealthy Egypt, and merchant cities like Ugarit, all bound by trade, diplomacy, and shared technologies. Then, around 1200 BCE, it all crumbled, palaces burned, writing systems vanished, and entire civilizations slipped into oblivion. But what if the catastrophe had never happened? What if those Bronze Age powers had weathered the storm, their ships continuing to crisscross the wine-dark sea uninterrupted? Linear B, the script of Mycenaean bureaucrats, might have evolved rather than disappeared. In our timeline, its loss plunged Greece into illiteracy for centuries, but preserved, it could have become the foundation for an even richer written tradition. Imagine Homer's epics recorded not just in oral fragments, but in continuous archives stretching back to the Trojan War itself. The Greek Dark Ages, that mysterious gap where history turns to legend, would never have existed. Instead, we might have tax records from Agamemnon's reign, diplomatic letters between Troy and Thebes, even early philosophical texts scratched onto clay centuries before Socrates. The Hittites, masters of ironworking locked away in their Anatolian strongholds, could have accelerated humanity's leap from bronze to iron. Their techniques, guarded as state secrets in our timeline, might have spread rapidly through peaceful trade rather than being lost in their empire's collapse. Picture Egyptian chariots reinforced with iron blades by 1300 BCE, or Mycenaean swords that never bent in battle. The competitive edge of these innovations would have reshaped warfare, but also agriculture, as iron plows unlocked harder soils earlier, potentially preventing famines that contributed to the real Bronze Age collapse. Sea peoples, those enigmatic raiders who likely triggered the catastrophe, might have been absorbed rather than feared. With stable Mediterranean empires better prepared, these mysterious migrants could have become trading partners or mercenaries, their naval expertise strengthening rather than sinking civilizations. The Phoenicians, inheritors of this peaceful world, might have launched their alphabet revolution centuries sooner, spreading literacy from Gibraltar to the Euphrates. Artifacts tell the story of what we lost. A single Hittite treaty tablet, baked hard when their capital burned, proves they pioneered international diplomacy. Mycenaean frescoes hint at vibrant artistry snuffed out overnight. Had these cultures endured, their masterpieces wouldn't be rare fragments, they'd be the foundation of an unbroken tradition, a continuous thread connecting antiquity to modernity. The cruelest irony, the collapse itself may have been preventable. Climate change, earthquakes, and rebellions didn't strike all at once. They exposed systemic fragility. A world where leaders heeded those warning signs could have been one where the Library of Alexandria wasn't the first great repository of knowledge, but the last in a line stretching back to the Bronze Age. That's the haunting power of this what if. It shows how close we came to losing or keeping the very roots of civilization. Picture a world where the Church's condemnation of Galileo wasn't just a historical footnote, but the beginning of a sweeping crusade against scientific inquiry. What if, instead of grudgingly accepting the evidence of a heliocentric solar system, the Vatican had doubled down, declaring all empirical investigation a threat to divine truth? The ripple effects would have plunged Europe into an endless medieval twilight where dogma reigned unchallenged and the scientific revolution never sparked. Without Galileo's defiance, the telescope might have remained a curious toy rather than a tool for cosmic discovery. Astronomy, stripped of its revolutionary potential, would have stayed tethered to Ptolemaic myths, with Earth stubbornly placed at the center of creation. Universities, once incubators of debate, could have devolved into seminaries, their curricula purged of anything contradicting scripture. The very concept of experimentation, testing hypotheses against observable reality, might have been branded heresy, leaving thinkers like Newton or Faraday without a framework to build upon. Europe's intellectual stagnation wouldn't just have delayed progress, it could have frozen it entirely. Meanwhile, the Islamic world, already preserving and advancing Greek and Persian knowledge, might have become the torchbearers of reason. Cities like Baghdad and Cordoba, where scholars once translated ancient texts under the Abbasid Caliphate, could have evolved into global capitals of astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. Imagine Ibn al-Haytham's optics pioneering camera technology centuries early, or al-Khwarizmi's algebra fueling an industrial revolution in the Middle East. With Europe sidelined, the Enlightenment might have blossomed in Cairo or Damascus, driven by thinkers who saw no contradiction between faith and empirical inquiry. The delay in space exploration alone would have been catastrophic. Without Kepler's laws or Newton's physics, rocketry remains a fantastical notion, the moon landing. Unthinkable until perhaps the 21st century, if at all. Satellite technology, GPS, even weather forecasting all hinge on scientific principles the Church might have suppressed. Our modern world, built on the shoulders of giants like Galileo and Darwin, would crumble into a patchwork of superstitious fiefdoms where the cure for disease is prayer and the stars are merely decorative. Yet the cruelest twist lies in the Church's own fate. By strangling curiosity, it wouldn't just have condemned humanity to ignorance, it would have ensured its own irrelevance. A religion that fears questions is one that withers in the shadows. The irony, by embracing science even reluctantly, the Church survived the Enlightenment. In a world where it chose suppression, both faith and reason might have lost. The Andes cradle one of history's most baffling riddles. Why did the Inca, master builders of Machu Picchu and architects of a 25,000-mile road network, never adopt the wheel? They had the concept. Children's toys with wheels have been found in Incan ruins. But what if necessity had forced their hand? Picture an alternate timeline where llamas, those stubborn beasts of burden, proved too fragile for the empire's ambitions, spurring engineers to unlock the wheel's potential centuries before Pizarro's arrival. The transformation would have begun with logistics. Incan roads, already feats of engineering with their suspension bridges and staircases carved into cliffs, could have accommodated wheeled carts hauling quinoa, potatoes, and silver from the highlands to the coast. Terraced farms might have seen mechanical plows increasing yields tenfold, while pulley systems, another technology the Inca grasped but never scaled, could have evolved into cranes capable of lifting the megalithic stones of Sacsayhuaman with eerie precision. The empire's famed messenger system, the Chasqui runners, might have been replaced by wheeled couriers shuttling quipu, encoded orders between cities at unprecedented speeds, tightening control over a realm stretching from Colombia to Chile. Metallurgy would have been the game changer. In our timeline, the Inca crafted exquisite gold ritual objects but lacked ironworking. With wheels driving demand for durable axles and tools, Andean smiths might have experimented with alloys, stumbling upon bronze or even early steel. Armor forged from these materials could have turned the tide against Spanish conquistadors. Imagine Atahualpa's warriors clad not in quilted cotton, but in articulated metal plates, their sling stones replaced by wheeled ballistae launching volcanic rock at armored cavalry. Horses, those terrifying beasts that shocked indigenous armies, might have met their match in wheeled war machines manned by soldiers who'd grown up engineering solutions to mountain warfare. Machu Picchu itself would have told a different story. Instead of the silent ruins we know, reconstructions reveal aqueducts powering water wheels that grind maize and operate bellows for smithies. Granite blocks precisely carved with copper tools might have been transported on massive wooden rollers greased with llama fat, their surfaces polished smooth by an early form of mechanical abrasion. The Temple of the Sun could have housed an astronomical device resembling the Antikythera mechanism, its gears tracking solstices with celestial accuracy, proof of a civilization that didn't just resist the invaders but outstripped them in innovation. The cruelest twist, this wasn't science fiction. The pieces were all there. The Inca understood leverage, inclined planes, and kinetic energy. What they lacked wasn't intellect, but the societal pressure to reinvent transport in a landscape where foot traffic seemed sufficient. And that's the haunting lesson of this what if. Necessity isn't just the mother of invention. Sometimes it's the absence of necessity that keeps genius dormant. August 6, 1945, the day the atomic age began. But what if the Manhattan Project's prized weapon had fizzled over Hiroshima? No blinding flash, no mushroom cloud, just a dud plummeting into the sea. The consequences would have rewritten the 20th century in ways both brutal and unexpected. Without the shock of nuclear devastation, Japan's surrender isn't guaranteed. Operation Downfall, the Allied plan to invade the Japanese mainland, swings into action. This wasn't just another battle, it was a nightmare scenario. Military planners projected over 1 million Allied casualties and 10 million Japanese deaths. The beaches of Kyushu would have become a slaughterhouse, with kamikaze planes sinking troop carriers and civilians armed with bamboo spears resisting to the last. The Pacific War, rather than ending in August, drags into 1946, with entire cities leveled by conventional firebombing. Kyoto, spared in our timeline, might have been obliterated, taking centuries of cultural heritage with it. Meanwhile, Stalin's Red Army, already sweeping through Manchuria, doesn't stop at Korea. Soviet tanks roll onto Hokkaido, claiming northern Japan as a communist foothold. A divided Japan mirrors post-war Germany, with Sapporo under the hammer and sickle while Tokyo remains under MacArthur's occupation. Cold War tensions ignite years earlier, not over Berlin but over Tokyo Bay. The Korean War, when it comes, might have been fought with Japanese instead of Korean battlegrounds, as Soviet-backed insurgents clash with American garrisons. The absence of atomic weapons changes more than just battlefields. It reshapes geopolitics. Without the terrifying example of Hiroshima, nuclear research stalls. Oppenheimer's team, discredited by their failed test, watches as funding dries up. The arms race never materializes. Instead, nations pour resources into conventional armies and biological weapons. Deterrence relies not on mutually assured destruction, but on the threat of endless, grinding conflicts like the one that consumed Japan. Scientific progress takes a different turn. Rocketry, turbocharged in our timeline by the demand for Eichbaum, remains the domain of visionaries like von Braun. The space age is delayed, with Sputnik perhaps launching in the 1970s instead of 1957. Personal computing, born from defense contracts, might never have gotten its jumpstart without the urgency of Cold War innovation. Silicon Valley could still be fruit orchards. Most hauntingly, humanity never confronts the existential horror of nuclear war. The doomsday clock isn't invented. Activists don't march for disarmament. Films don't depict apocalyptic wastelands. The collective trauma that forced superpowers to step back from the brink in Cuba and Berlin is absent. Great powers wage proxy wars with abandon, believing victory is possible because no one has seen the alternative. Yet there's a grim irony here. The very weapon that terrified the world into restraint might have prevented far deadlier conflicts. The bomb's shadow forced diplomacy where armies might have clashed. Without it, we could have stumbled into a Third World War, not with a bang, but with a decade of fire and blood. History's turning points aren't always marked by success. Sometimes it's the failures that change everything. The ringing of a telephone never pierces the quiet of this alternate 19th century. Instead, communication thrums along at the pace of ink drying, telegrams clattering in offices, handwritten letters crisscrossing continents by steamship, and urgent messages hurtling through pneumatic tubes beneath city streets. Without Alexander Graham Bell's invention, humanity's relationship with connection would have taken a radically different shape, one where patience was a virtue, words carried weight, and distance wasn't obliterated in an instant. Consider the rhythm of daily life. Business deals wouldn't be sealed with a quick call, but negotiated through meticulously drafted correspondence, each sentence polished to avoid ambiguity. The art of letter writing wouldn't be a nostalgic hobby, it would be an essential skill taught alongside arithmetic. Famous feuds and romances might have played out in florid prose, their drama preserved in archives rather than lost to the ephemeral chatter of voice. And when news came, it wouldn't arrive in breathless real-time updates. The sinking of the Titanic, those waiting ashore might have learned of it days later, clinging to hope until the final telegraph confirmed the worst. Urban landscapes would tell their own story. Skyscrapers designed around elevator shafts in our world might have featured vast pneumatic tube networks snaking through their cores, whisking capsules between floors at the speed of steam. Street corners could have been dotted with public telegraph booths, where clerks translated spoken words into Morse code for immediate transmission. The concept of a dial tone wouldn't exist, but the hiss of pressurized air moving through underground pipes would be as familiar as the hum of electricity is to us. Technology's trajectory bends in unexpected ways. Without the phone's demand for switchboards and wiring, innovation might have leaped toward visual communication earlier. Picture bulky, telesketch devices in Victorian parlors where senders scrawled messages onto a metal plate, their handwriting magically reproduced miles away by synchronized needles. Or perhaps the radio, freed from competing with telephony, would have dominated personal communication, with families tuning into private frequencies for evening conversations instead of gathering around a static-prone console. The geopolitical implications are profound. Diplomacy would lack the immediacy of hotlines, forcing nations to rely on ambassadors and coded telegrams. Crises like the Cuban Missile Crisis might have unfolded over agonizing weeks rather than days, with each communique requiring hours to encrypt and deliver. Stock markets, unable to react instantly to fluctuations, could have remained local affairs, their ticker tapes lagging behind reality by entire trading sessions. Even warfare would change. Generals couldn't coordinate fronts in real time, making campaigns more deliberate and perhaps less ruthless. Yet the most fascinating shift might be psychological. In a world without phones, solitude wouldn't be a luxury, it would be the default. Friendships would require planning, romances, commitment. The constant buzz of notifications wouldn't fracture attention spans, but neither would loved ones be reachable in emergencies. Society might have cherished deeper, if fewer, connections, valuing quality over the illusion of constant availability. The telephone didn't just speed up communication, it rewired human expectations. Its absence forces us to question whether we gained more than we lost when the world learned to speak at the speed of light. Constantinople stands unbroken, its mighty Theodosian walls repelling maimed the conqueror's cannons in 1453. The Ottomans denied their prize, fracture into squabbling beyliks while Byzantium clings to life as the last beacon of Roman grandeur. This isn't just a military victory, it's a seismic redrawing of history's map. Picture a world where Greek fire still burns in the Golden Horn's arsenals, where scholars in the Hagia Sophia's shadow debate Plato rather than bow to minarets, where the imperial double-headed eagle gazes defiantly over a Mediterranean still shaped by Roman law. The immediate impact reshapes Europe's religious fabric. Without Ottoman pressure, Orthodox Christianity remains the dominant force in the Balkans. Bulgaria and Serbia don't fall under Islamic rule. Instead, they flourish as client states in a Byzantine commonwealth, their art and architecture echoing Constantinopolitan splendor. Venice's merchant empire, no longer able to exploit the eastern Mediterranean's chaos, declines faster, leaving Genoa as Byzantium's primary trading partner. The Black Sea remains a Roman lake, its grain shipments feeding a metropolis that never dwindled to a shadowy village. Now turn westward. The Reformation's fires might never have spread without the spark of Greek scholars fleeing Ottoman conquest. In our timeline, these refugees carried classical knowledge to Italy, fueling the Renaissance. But what if they'd stayed? Byzantine libraries, overflowing with untouched manuscripts, could have made Constantinople the intellectual capital of Europe. Erasmus might have journeyed east to debate theology with patriarchs, while Luther's 95 Theses, lacking humanist criticism of church corruption, gathered dust in Wittenberg. A united Christendom, anchored by Byzantium's ancient legitimacy, could have crushed Protestantism in its cradle or accommodated reforms within a single, sprawling ecclesiastical empire. Modern maps tell the most tantalizing story. Instead of Turkey, we'd see a rump Byzantium stretching from Thrace to Trebizond, its borders guarded by revived themes, military districts staffed by farmer soldiers. Anatolia, gradually reconquered from Turkmen warlords, becomes a patchwork of Greek-speaking cities and Turkic hinterlands. The Aegean Islands never fall to the Ottomans, remaining vacation spots for Constantinopolitan aristocrats. Crimea, still governed by Byzantium's Gothic allies, avoids Russian annexation entirely. Yet the empire's survival comes with brutal ironies. Without Ottoman expansion, Spain and Portugal lack the impetus to seek alternate trade routes, meaning Columbus never sails west. The Americas remain isolated for generations, their great civilizations untouched by European steel or disease. The Atlantic slave trade might never have reached its horrific scale, but neither would the scientific and democratic revolutions born from Europe's global encounters. Byzantium, for all its glory, was a conservative force, more likely to preserve than innovate. The printing press, viewed as a threat to imperial control, could have been banned, stifling the spread of ideas that in our timeline transformed the world. The true marvel lies in Byzantium's resilience. This wasn't some fantasy, the empire nearly survived. A few more Venetian reinforcements, a failed Ottoman assault, or a timely crusade could have changed everything. That's the haunting lesson. History's greatest empires often hang by a thread, and the world we know is just one fragile version of what might have been. The whir of automated looms echoes through Bengal's monsoon-drenched valleys a full century before Arkwright's mills darken England's skies. This isn't a fantasy, it was tantalizingly possible. By 1700, Mughal India accounted for a staggering 25% of global GDP, its cotton weavers supplying fabrics so fine they were measured by the weight of 100 petals. The ingredients for industrialization were all there: abundant resources, skilled labor, and a vast network of trade routes stretching from Samarkand to Sumatra. Had a single visionary emperor recognized the potential of mechanization, the workshop of the world might have risen along the Ganges rather than the Thames. Consider the technological foundations already in place. Indian metallurgists had perfected high-carbon steel centuries before Europe, crafting Damascus blades that could slice through silk Madeira. The region's waterwheel systems, used for irrigation since antiquity, could have been repurposed to power spinning frames. Even the organizational models existed. The Mongol Empire's centralized revenue system, the Zapt, functioned with bureaucrat efficiency, capable of marshalling resources for large-scale projects. A single decree from Delhi could have transformed these scattered advantages into a coordinated industrial leap, putting steam engines on river barges while Europe still relied on windmills. Trade routes tell the story of what might have been. Indian textiles, already coveted from Versailles to Edo, would have flooded global markets at unthinkable scale and speed. The East India Company, rather than exploiting a fragmented subcontinent, might have become a mere middleman for finished goods. London's financial rise, built on colonial extraction, would have stalled as silver flowed east to pay for mechanized muslins and calicoes. The Atlantic slave trade, fueled by cotton plantations feeding British mills, could have remained a brutal but smaller-scale enterprise, with Indian factories rendering transatlantic shipments uneconomical. Cultural repercussions run deeper. With technological supremacy comes intellectual dominance. Sanskrit and Persian might have replaced French as the languages of science, with Newtonian physics debated in Madras rather than Cambridge. The Enlightenment could have drawn inspiration from Indian mathematicians like Aryabhatta instead of Greek philosophers, skewing everything from political theory to architectural styles. Even timekeeping would have diverged. Imagine the world setting its clocks to Calcutta Mean Time rather than Greenwich. Yet the cruelest twist lies in colonialism's reversal. A mechanized Mughal realm wouldn't just have resisted British encroachment, it might have become the colonizer. With shipbuilding boosted by iron production, Indian armadas could have patrolled the Indian Ocean as ruthlessly as the Royal Navy, planting flags on African coasts and Australian shores. The Opium Wars might have played out in reverse, with Bengal merchants forcibly opening Chinese ports to sell machine-woven silks. The very concept of the West would have been relegated to geographical trivia, with universities teaching the Great Indian Epoch as the pivotal era of human progress. History's hinges swing on such fragile pivots. All that stood between this reality and ours was a single variable, the spark of imagination that turned water wheels into engines of revolution. The Mongols had every advantage. Fate merely asked them to seize it. The Spanish Armada's sails don't shred in the North Atlantic storms of 1588. Instead, they surge triumphantly up the Thames, their decks bristling with tercio veterans. London falls, Elizabeth is dragged to the Tower, and Philip Roman II banner flies over Westminster. With England crushed, the Habsburgs grip Europe tightens into a stranglehold. No British Empire, no Protestant bulwark, just a continent reshaped by Spanish steel and Inquisition fervor. The consequences would have rewritten the very soul of the modern world. First, the Reformation staggers. Protestantism, already embattled, loses its northern anchor. Without England's support, Dutch rebels might have collapsed under Habsburg reconquest, snuffing out Calvinism's rise. The 30 Years' War, that apocalyptic clash of faiths, could have ended before it began, with Catholic armies rolling unchecked through Germany. The Peace of Westphalia, which in our timeline enshrined religious tolerance, never happens. Instead, Europe languishes under doctrinal uniformity, its universities purged of dissent, its printing presses monitored by friars. Shakespeare's plays burned as heresy, the King James Bible smothered in its cradle. The New World becomes a monochrome of Spanish crosses. Without English privateers like Drake to harass their fleets, Spain consolidates its American empire unchallenged. Jamestown and Plymouth Rock are replaced by fortified mission towns stretching from Florida to the Pacific. The Aztec and Inca, already shattered, might have seen their remnants assimilated into a rigid caste system, their languages erased by mandatory Latin liturgy. The slave trade, instead of pivoting toward British-controlled sugar islands, remains an Iberian monopoly, funneling millions more Africans into silver mines rather than cotton fields. But the most profound shift might be cultural. The Enlightenment, born from Protestant skepticism and pluralism, struggles for oxygen in a Habsburg Europe. Descartes and Locke, if they wrote at all, do so in exile or not at all. Scientific progress crawls under the watchful eye of censors. Galileo's trial isn't an anomaly but the norm. Industrialization, which in our timeline thrived in Britain's open markets, stalls under Spain's top-down mercantilism. The steam engine, lacking patent protections and venture capital, remains a curious toy in a Madrid workshop. Trade routes twist into unrecognizable shapes. Manila galleons, no longer harried by British rivals, dominate Pacific commerce. The East India Company never forms. Instead, Manila becomes the entrepot where Chinese silks meet Mexican silver without middlemen. Russia, deprived of British naval technology, remains a backward giant, its tsars eyeing Europe's Iron Curtain with envy rather than ambition, yet the cruelest irony. Spain's victory might have bankrupted it faster. The Armada's success wouldn't have solved the empire's fatal flaw, its addiction to New World silver. With England's loot added to its coffers, Madrid could have doubled down on extraction, accelerating the inflation that hollowed its economy. The Habsburgs, stretched thin from Vienna to Lima, might have collapsed under their own weight, leaving Europe not unified but fractured into 100 squabbling statelets. The Armada wasn't just a fleet, it was a fulcrum. On one side, the world we know, on the other, a twilight of candles and catechisms where the sun never set on the Spanish Empire because the dawn of modernity never came. Cleopatra's victory at Actium doesn't just save Egypt, it reshapes the destiny of Rome itself. Picture Octavian's fleet shattered, his ambitions drowned in the Ionian Sea, while Antony and Cleopatra return to Alexandria not as doomed lovers, but as architects of a Mediterranean empire where the Nile holds more sway than the Tiber. The Ptolemaic dynasty, rather than collapsing beneath Rome's sandals, endures as the last beacon of Hellenistic brilliance, its influence seeping into the marrow of the ancient world. Alexandria's lighthouse doesn't crumble into legend. It becomes the symbol of a civilization that never dimmed. The great library, spared the fires of religious zealots, continues to amass scrolls from India to Iberia, its scholars debating geometry under the same roof where Euclid once lectured. Meanwhile, Rome, denied Egypt's grain shipments, stumbles into crisis. The bread riots of the late Republic worsen without Nile harvests to stabilize prices. The empire's eastern provinces, long enamored with Egyptian culture, might have tilted toward Alexandria as their true capital, leaving Rome a hollow shell of faded glory. Even Latin, the language of legions, could have been overshadowed by Greek as the lingua franca of trade and diplomacy, with hieroglyphs persisting as a sacred script rather than a forgotten cipher. Religion takes the most fascinating turn. In our timeline, Christianity's rise was tied to Rome's imperial machinery, but what if Egypt's gods had held their ground? The cult of Isis, already widespread across the Mediterranean, might have evolved into a monotheistic challenger, blending her maternal symbolism with Ptolemaic statecraft. Imagine bishops debating not the nature of Christ, but the unity of Osiris, Horus, and Isis as divine manifestations. Or perhaps a syncretic faith emerges where the Virgin Mary is revered as Isis reborn, her iconography retaining the ancient goddess's headdress and lotus scepters. The Nicene Creed could have been drafted not in Byzantium, but in the shadow of the pyramids, with debates over divinity settled by Alexandrian philosophers rather than Roman emperors. The ripple effects reach beyond theology. Without Rome's centralized church, Christianity fractures into regional variants early. The Coptic Church, already distinct in our world, might have become the dominant strain, its liturgy echoing pharaonic hymns. Latin Christendom, deprived of Egypt's intellectual heft, could have remained a backwater, its theology impoverished by the loss of Alexandrian thinkers like Origen. The very calendar we use might be reckoned by flood cycles rather than Roman consuls, with New Year's Day falling in Thoth, the month the Nile swells. Yet the most striking transformation would be scientific. Ptolemaic Egypt, with its unbroken lineage of astronomers and engineers, could have accelerated the Renaissance by a millennium. The Antikythera mechanism, that ancient Greek marvel, might have been mass-produced in Alexandria's workshops, its gears calculating eclipses for temples and markets alike. Steam power, toyed with by Hellenistic inventors, could have matured into practical engines, turning the desert into a network of irrigated gardens. Medicine, guided by texts from the House of Life, might have bypassed medieval superstitions entirely, with germ theory emerging alongside geometry. The cruelest irony, this wasn't pure fantasy. The Battle of Actium was a near-run thing. A shift in the wind, a bolder charge by Antony's fleet, and Octavian's dreams might have dissolved like papyrus in the Nile. That's the haunting power of what if the realization that the world we know is just one fragile iteration of history, and the threads of fate tangle in the hands of those who dare to grasp them. The digital age never dawns for the average citizen. Instead of a global network humming in every pocket, the internet remains locked behind military firewalls, a classified tool for generals and spies, not schools and living rooms. The 21st century unfolds in a world where communication moves at the speed of paper, where news travels through ink-stained printing presses rather than viral algorithms. Globalization doesn't vanish, but it stutters, forced to rely on fax machines, transatlantic flights, and the slow churn of container ships. Newspapers thrive in this alternate reality. Without the instant gratification of tweets or clickbait headlines, investigative journalism retains its prestige and power. Watergate-level scandals might still take months to unravel, but when they do, the revelations land with the weight of hard evidence, not the ephemeral buzz of a trending hashtag. Local papers, free from the crushing competition of free online content, continue to document community grievances and triumphs, preserving the granular texture of civic life. Magazines become cultural battlegrounds, their glossy pages debating ideas with the depth that Twitter threads and TikTok hot takes could never match. Commerce takes a different shape entirely. Amazon doesn't rise to monopoly power without the infrastructure of online shopping. Instead, mail-order catalogs evolve into elaborate, niche publications. Imagine IKEA annual catalog as a coveted coffee table book rather than a digital afterthought. Small businesses flourish in physical storefronts, their survival untroubled by the pressure to optimize for search engines. Yet innovation isn't snuffed out, just redirected. Robotics and automation might leap ahead in factories and warehouses, where proprietary networks streamline production, but the personal computer revolution stalls. Home computers, if they exist at all, remain glorified typewriters, their modems gathering dust without an open web to explore. Social interactions tell a surprising story. Without social media's curated personas, friendships are forged in real-time, awkward silences, unedited expressions, and all. Political movements organized through grassroots networks, their momentum built on door-to-door canvassing and town hall debates rather than hashtag campaigns. Misinformation doesn't disappear, but it spreads at a pace that allows fact-checkers to keep up, muting the viral wildfires of conspiracy theories. Yet isolation lingers in unexpected ways. Without video calls, migrant workers can't glimpse their families across oceans. Without online forums, niche hobbies and identities struggle to find communities. The darkest divergence might be in governance. Surveillance states, lacking the tools of mass data collection, resort to cruder methods: informants, wiretaps, and censorship bureaus. Revolutions aren't live-streamed, they're whispered in back alleys until they're ready to erupt. Meanwhile, classified military networks operating in secrecy could have birthed a parallel technological universe AI developed for war games, encryption unbreakable to civilian analysts. The digital divide isn't about who has access to Wi-Fi, but who holds the keys to an invisible kingdom of data. This is the eerie paradox of a world without the public internet. Some losses are undeniable: the lightning pace of collaboration, the democratization of knowledge, the sheer convenience of connected lives. But some gains emerge in the shadows: privacy not yet commodified, attention spans not yet fractured, truths not yet drowned in noise. The internet, we know, didn't just change how we communicate. It rewired human cognition itself, and that's the unsettling heart of this what if, not just the loss of a tool, but the absence of a revolution that reshaped how we think, fight, and dream. The year 1519 unfolds with a gasp of surprise, not at the sight of Cortés' armor, but at the resilience of Tenochtitlan's people. Smallpox, the invisible conqueror that ravaged millions in our timeline, meets an unexpected foe here: genetic resistance. Some scholars speculate it wasn't inevitable. Had Mesoamerican populations encountered old-world illnesses centuries earlier through fleeting Viking contact or Pacific Drift voyages, their immune systems might have built defenses. In this alternate world, the Aztec Empire doesn't crumple before Spanish steel. It absorbs it. Tenochtitlan's canals still gleam under the sun, but now they're flanked by foundries where captured arquebuses are reverse-engineered. Aztec Tileme porters, once hauling tribute on their backs, roll Spanish-style cannon along causeways paved with volcanic stone. The great temple complex expands skyward, its stepped pyramids now reinforced with mortar techniques learned from conquistador masons. Yet this isn't mere imitation, it's transformation. Obsidian-edged macuahudal swords are fitted with Toledo steel cores, creating hybrid weapons that terrify European reinforcements. Spanish friars, instead of burning codices, find themselves bargaining with Nahua scholars to access astronomical records more precise than anything in Salamanca's libraries. Religious syncretism takes startling forms. Quetzalcoatl's return, prophesied to coincide with Cortés' arrival, is reinterpreted not as defeat but as divine collaboration. Christian crosses are carved with jade inlays depicting the plumed serpent. Baptisms are performed alongside ritual bloodletting. The Inquisition, horrified, declares this heresy, until silver shipments from Aztec-controlled mines become vital to the Habsburg treasury. Pragmatism triumphs over dogma, and a new Catholic Nahua faith emerges, its hymns blending Gregorian chant with the thunder of Teponaztli drums. Trade routes twist into uncharted configurations. Aztec Pochteka merchants, armed with Spanish navigation charts, establish outposts in Manila and Nagasaki, exchanging cacao and cochineal dye for Asian silks and matchlocks. The global silver flow shifts dramatically. Potosi's riches are funneled through Tenochtitlan's coffers rather than Seville's. European monarchs, desperate to balance the trade deficit, send not conquistadors but envoys bearing gifts of glass and clocks, hoping to impress an empire that now views them as upstart kingdoms. The most profound change is demographic. Without the apocalyptic death toll of disease, indigenous languages and traditions remain dominant. Nahuatl, not Spanish, becomes the lingua franca from Panama to Santa Fe. The Comicac schools, once reserved for nobility, expand to teach metallurgy and cartography alongside poetry and statecraft. A mestizo identity still emerges, but it's one where featherworkers and gunsmiths collaborate as equals rather than colonizer and colonized. Yet this world isn't without shadows. The Aztec hunger for captives doesn't vanish, it evolves. Gunpowder turns the flower wars into deadlier spectacles, where prisoners taken in battlefield clashes feed both the altars of Huitzilopochtli and the insatiable silver mine. The Chinampas, those floating gardens that fed a metropolis, now strain under the weight of a population boom unchecked by plagues. Ecologists centuries later might lament the deforestation of the Valley of Mexico as demand for charcoal to smelt ore outpaces sustainability. History's cruelest joke, this scenario wasn't pure fantasy. The Mexica were master adapters, quick to adopt superior technology from rivals like the Tarascans. Their downfall wasn't lack of ingenuity, but biological catastrophe. That's the haunting lesson. Sometimes the greatest threats aren't the ones gleaming under the sun, but the ones lurking in a single cough in the crowd. Karl Marx never pens the Communist Manifesto. Instead, his quill drips with romantic verse, his name whispered in literary salons rather than shouted in revolutionary halls. The man who once declared religion the opium of the people now crafts sonnets comparing love to a trembling flame, his revolutionary fervor sublimated into iambic pentameter. Without Marx's incendiary critique of capital, the 19th century stumbles forward unchecked, no dialectical materialism to crystallize worker grievances, no spectre haunting Europe's aristocrats. The consequences would unravel the 20th century thread by thread. Labor movements stripped of their theoretical backbone, fracture into localized protests rather than a unified class struggle. The Haymarket Affair might have remained a Chicago skirmish instead of a global rallying cry. The 8-hour workday, a pipe dream rather than a hard-won reality. Factories freed from the threat of collective bargaining operate with Dickensian brutality. Children still spindle yarn in mills, their small fingers prized for dexterity. Unions, where they exist, resemble medieval guilds more than political forces, haggling over wages but never challenging ownership itself. The very concept of workers' rights remains nebulous, a charitable concession rather than an inherent demand. Capitalism, unchallenged by systemic critique, mutates into something even Adam Smith might fear. Monopolies swell like tumors, their boardrooms merging with legislatures. The Sherman Antitrust Act never materializes. Rockefeller's Standard Oil isn't broken up but sanctified as a national champion. Economic crashes, lacking the pressure valve of social welfare, spiral into anarchic violence. Imagine the Great Depression with no New Deal, just bred riots metastasizing into warlord fiefdoms across the Midwest. The term social safety net doesn't enter the lexicon. Beggars and workhouses endure as natural features of the urban landscape. Cold War chessboards collect dust in this timeline. Without Marx to inspire Lenin, the Bolshevik Revolution fizzles into a botched coup, its leaders exiled to Siberian obscurity. Tsarist Russia limps into the 20th century, its serfs emancipated in name only, its industrialization funded by French loans rather than 5-year plans. America, lacking a communist rival, never develops its military-industrial complex. No Red Scare means no McCarthyism. No CIA-backed coups in Guatemala or Iran. But the absence of superpower rivalry also means no space race. Sputnik stays grounded. Armstrong's bootprint never marks the lunar dust, the Marshall Plan. Unnecessary, the Berlin Wall unbuilt. The very idea of a third world, caught between competing ideologies, evaporates. Formerly colonized nations negotiate their independence not as proxies, but as supplicants to a single economic order. Yet the most haunting absence might be intellectual. Marx didn't just predict revolution, he gave language to alienation, to the gnawing sense that human worth had been reduced to wage receipts. Without that vocabulary, discontent simmers wordlessly. Dostoevsky's underground man rages without a manifesto. Chaplin's tramp stumbles through factories without a critique. Even art suffers. Picasso's Guernica lacks its sharp political edges. Brecht's plays dissolve into apolitical farce. The Frankfurt School never convenes. Foucault's genealogies of power remain unwritten. Philosophy, psychology, and economics all pivot on Marx's absence, their disciplines poorer for the lack of his disruptive energy. The irony is exquisite. Marx the poet might have found success. His letters reveal a man enchanted by Shakespeare and Goethe. But in trading the pen for the pamphlet, he sacrificed verse for a different kind of immortality. His words didn't just describe the world, they set it aflame. And that's the paradox of this what if. Sometimes the most enduring art isn't written in ink, but in the blood and sweat of history itself. The Titanic glides gracefully past the iceberg on that moonlit April night, its hull unblemished, its passengers blissfully unaware of how close they came to disaster. The ship arrives in New York to cheering crowds and triumphant headlines, cementing White Star Line's reputation as the undisputed monarch of the seas. But this triumph isn't just averted tragedy, it's a turning point that reshapes the 20th century's transportation landscape. With confidence in ocean liners unshaken, the golden age of steamships stretches decades longer, casting a long shadow over the fledgling aviation industry. Investors, dazzled by the Titanic's flawless maiden voyage, pour money into ever grander vessels. Blueprints for upgraded sister ships gather dust in drawing offices, replaced by plans for leviathans twice as large, with triple propeller systems and reinforced bows capable of shrugging off iceberg impact. The Olympic-class ships evolve into floating cities, their hulls lined with experimental watertight compartment designs inspired by the near miss. These unsinkable behemoths dominate transatlantic travel well into the 1930s, their ballrooms and smoking lounges becoming symbols of Gilded Age excess rather than cautionary tales. Aviation stumbles in this alternate timeline. The Wright Brothers' breakthroughs, once heralded as the future, now seem like quaint curiosities next to the luxury and reliability of steamships. Charles Lindbergh's solo Atlantic crossing, a footnote, not a sensation. Without the Titanic disaster eroding public trust in ocean travel, governments delay funding for commercial air routes. Military aircraft development stagnates, leaving biplanes to buzz harmlessly over battlefields in World War I while dreadnoughts rule the waves. The jet age, when it finally arrives, might lag behind our world by half a century. Maritime safety laws, shockingly lax in 1912, remain toothless without the Titanic sinking to spur reform. Lifeboat requirements stay at a bare minimum, deemed unnecessary for vessels dubbed indestructible. Wireless operators, no longer mandated to monitor distress frequencies around the clock, treat their equipment as an afterthought. The International Ice Patrol, established after the disaster in our timeline, never forms, meaning icebergs continue to claim lesser-known ships in silent tragedies. The economic ripple effects stretch far beyond shipping lanes. Wall Street's faith in White Star Line bolsters British and American investor confidence during the tense pre-war years, potentially delaying or even preventing the financial panics that preceded World War I. Luxury goods markets flourish as first-class passengers demand ever more opulent accommodations, driving innovations in interior design and gourmet cuisine. The very rhythm of globalization slows without the pressure to compete with air travel. Steamship companies have little incentive to prioritize speed over comfort, meaning transatlantic crossings remain week-long affairs rather than overnight hops. Yet the most haunting consequence might be cultural. The Titanic's near disaster becomes a whispered legend among sailors, not a universal parable of hubris. James Cameron's epic film never gets made. Nearer My God to Thee isn't immortalized as a hymn of tragedy. Most chillingly, the lesson, even the unsinkable can sink, goes unlearned until an even larger ship, built with the same blind confidence, meets its fate on a stormier night. History has a way of repeating its warnings, just louder each time. Rome buckles under the Vandal onslaught not in 455 but 4 decades earlier, a single generation of brutal warfare shifting the empire's trajectory when Christianity still clung to the margins. Without Constantine's conversion and the Edict of Milan, the old gods don't fade quietly into myth. Instead, the Neoplatonic academies of Athens and Alexandria endure, their philosophers debating the nature of the one beneath colonnades untouched by iconoclastic mobs. This isn't just a spiritual divergence, it's an intellectual revolution stillborn in our timeline. Hypatia's fate epitomizes the loss. In our world, the mathematician's murder in 415 marked the dying gasp of classical science. But in this alternate 4th century, her lectures on conic sections and hydraulics draw crowds of students, some scribbling notes on wax tablets, others adjusting the gears of portable planetariums. The Mouseion of Alexandria, that crucible of Hellenistic learning, doesn't crumble into a Coptic church. Its workshops hum with prototypes, steam-powered toys evolve into piston-driven water pumps, bronze astrolabes gain precision gears capable of predicting eclipses to the minute. The Antikythera mechanism isn't a freak artifact, it's the foundation of a mechanical renaissance. Consider mathematics. Without Augustine's dismissal of pagan knowledge, Boethius's translations of Greek texts flourish. The concept of zero, which trickled slowly westward from India in our timeline, might have been formalized centuries earlier by scholars fluent in both Platonic dialogues and Hindu sutras. Algebra, rather than being reintroduced to Europe via Arabic texts in the Middle Ages, could have emerged directly from Neoplatonic number mysticism blended with Egyptian practical geometry. Imagine Archimedes' siege engines preserved in continuous technical manuals, inspiring torsion-powered mills grinding grain along the Tiber, an industrial whisper from antiquity. Medicine takes a chillingly modern turn. Galen's theories, frozen in dogma by Christian Europe, remain dynamic under pagan scrutiny. Dissection, taboo in our medieval world, continues unimpeded in Alexandria's anatomy theaters. Herophilus's discoveries about the nervous system, suppressed after his death, might have led to early anesthesia or even primitive nerve grafts. The Hippocratic Oath, stripped of later Christian modifications, retains its original emphasis on empirical observation, meaning diagnoses rely on pulse readings rather than prayers. The darkest irony, Christianity's delayed rise could have spared millions. Without imperial enforcement, the Donatist and Arian schisms remain theological disputes rather than pretext for massacres. Theodosian decrees never mandate the burning of heretical texts. The library's descendants might have preserved Gnostic Gospels alongside Euclid's proofs. Yet paganism's tolerance cuts both ways. Does a Roman Empire still sacrificing bulls to Jupiter resist slavery as fervently as abolitionist monks? Does the lack of a unifying church leave Europe fractured into warring cults of Mithras and Isis? The true cost lies in roads not taken. Our timeline's scientific revolution occurred when Europe rediscovered antiquity through Islamic scholars. But what if that knowledge had never been lost? The 1,000 years between Archimedes and Newton might have been a continuous arc of discovery, each generation building on scrolls we know only as charred fragments. The Renaissance wouldn't have been a rebirth, just the latest chapter in an unbroken story. That's the tragedy of the Vandals' earlier victory. Rome's fall was inevitable. But the burning of its ideas, that was a choice. The caravans never stop. From the Han Dynasty's golden age to the Industrial Revolution's dawn, the Silk Road hums with a relentless exchange of goods, ideas, and innovations unbroken by Ottoman conquests or maritime shortcuts. Imagine a world where Marco Polo's journals aren't nostalgic memoirs of a fading network, but real-time dispatches from a superhighway of civilizations. The consequences would ripple far beyond spices and silks, rewiring humanity's technological and cultural DNA. Start with metallurgy. In our timeline, Chinese blast furnace techniques took centuries to reach Europe. But with caravanserais buzzing from Xi'an to Venice, those secrets might have traveled as fast as a camel could trot. Damascus steel, already legendary, could have been mass-produced using Song Dynasty coal-fired smelters, equipping Mongol horsemen with alloy sabers while knights still struggled with brittle iron. Papermaking, instead of creeping westward via Abbasid intermediaries, becomes universal by the year 1000. Accelerating record-keeping from Byzantine tax offices to Parisian scriptoria. Even something as simple as the stirrup, which revolutionized warfare by stabilizing mounted archers, might have reached the Roman legions before their collapse, altering the fate of entire empires. Now consider the biological exchange. The Black Death likely hitchhiked along the Silk Road in our 14th century. But what if open routes had allowed earlier, gentler exposure? Smallpox could have trickled into Europe and Asia through minor outbreaks, building immunities gradually rather than in catastrophic waves. The Americas, when eventually contacted, might have faced less devastating plagues, leaving Tenochtitlan and Cusco with populations robust enough to negotiate as equals with European explorers. Columbian exchange, more like a balanced trade summit, with maize and potatoes flowing east while Eurasian livestock acclimated to Andean highlands over generations. Religious landscapes shift dramatically. Buddhism's march westward doesn't stall at the Tarim Basin. Instead, Gandharan-style monasteries dot the Caspian coast, their fusion of Greek realism and Indian spirituality influencing Christian iconography centuries before the Renaissance. Nestorian Christians, rather than being squeezed out by Islamic expansion, thrive as middlemen in a pluralistic corridor where Zoroastrian fire temples stand beside Manichaean shrines. The concept of holy war loses traction when your trading partner's deity might be tomorrow's customer. Imagine Saladin and Richard the Lionheart haggling over spices while comparing notes on angelology. The darkest twist, colonialism as we know it might never gain traction. With overland routes flourishing, European monarchs lack the desperate incentive to fund risky sea voyages. Portugal's caravels don't inch down Africa. Columbus dies a genocidal merchant with bizarre maps no patron will finance. The sugar and slave triangle of the Atlantic remains uncharted, its horrors unimagined. Instead, wealth flows through Kashgar and Samarkand, entrenching Central Asia as the planet's economic heartland. The age of exploration becomes the age of infrastructure, with khans and caliphs competing to build the safest, fastest roads for merchants. Yet permanence carries its own perils. A Silk Road without decline might fossilize technologies that ocean travel forced to evolve. Shipbuilding stagnates without the pressure to cross oceans. Compasses remain ceremonial curiosities rather than navigational essentials. The printing press, which in our timeline leaped forward with maritime trade's demand for charts, might stay confined to woodblock snippets, and without colonies to exploit, does Europe's scientific revolution sputter for lack of New World silver to fund it? The Silk Road's endurance isn't just about commerce, it's about contingency. Its decay in our world wasn't inevitable. A single khan's decision to protect rather than plunder, a sultan's choice to tax lightly rather than conquer, and the threads binding east and west might have held firm. That's the bittersweet lesson. The connections we lose shape the world as profoundly as those we keep. History isn't a straight line. It's a fragile web of decisions, accidents, and moments so delicate that a single breath could have snapped them. The scenarios we've explored aren't just flights of fancy. They're glimpses into the razor-thin margins that define our world. A different vote, a survived leader, a storm avoided or embraced, any one of them could have bent the arc of everything we know. The Library of Alexandria standing tall, the Mongols sweeping Europe, Rome never falling. Each possibility reminds us how little it takes to send humanity hurtling down an unrecognizable path. Think about the weight of that fragility. The past isn't some distant relic, it's alive, pulsing with roads not taken. What-ifs aren't just entertainment, they're tools. They sharpen our understanding of how civilizations rise and crumble, how progress isn't inevitable, and how the very ground beneath our feet is built on 1,000 near misses. The difference between this world and another might be as small as a missed message or a split-second choice. Now it's your turn. Which of these scenarios would have reshaped our present the most? Would a surviving Byzantine Empire have kept the Renaissance alive centuries earlier? Could a world without the atomic bomb have been more peaceful or more prone to larger, bloodier wars? Dive into the comments and tell us your own favorite historical what-if. What moment would you revisit, and how do you think the dominoes would fall? And if these alternate realities have left you hungry for more, don't forget to subscribe. We're just scratching the surface of history's untaken turns. From forgotten inventions to wars that almost were, there's a whole universe of possibilities waiting to be explored. So here's the final question to send you down the rabbit hole. If you could rewrite one event in history, not for power or glory, but for the sheer ripple effect, which would it be? The answer might reveal more about our world than you